Next of kin pays its respects to our oldest and greatest storytellers, the traditional owners of land and waters that this podcast is recorded on. G'day friends, welcome to another episode of Next of Kin. My name is Casey Barros and I'm so delighted to have you join me. Today I'm speaking with Nick Engerer. He is a biohacker and longevity mindset strategist. Now if you just asked yourself what the hell that means, let me try and unpick it. So biohacking is essentially when someone makes incremental changes to their body, their diet, their lifestyle in a bid to improve their health and well-being. So in essence, if you're interested in your health, and you probably are if you're listening to this, you very well could be a biohacker too. Nick is a scientist, but his background is more environmental, including a PhD in solar. And I'm telling you that because if you Google him, it's possible that he might come up as Dr. Nick Engerer. And I just want to be really clear that he's not a medical doctor. So in this episode, we're not giving health advice. We're just sharing some of the science around longevity and Nick's experiences. And as always, I'm putting it through filters of credibility and accuracy before I share anything with you. But I will jump in once or twice just to clarify something. What I found really interesting about this chat is that I think it's a great case study in how we should all approach our health and our investment in it, that we should be testing and measuring to find what's right and what works for us. We also talk a lot about the commodification and consumerism of health and well-being and longevity. So if you find yourself frequently adding to cart in an attempt to wind back the clock, you'll get a lot out of this chat. Oh, and a heads up, my dog Basil felt very compelled to join us right at the end. So if you hear a little Ewok in the background, that's him. That's enough of me. Here's Nick. So Nick, everybody listening to this, I think if we ask them, they would probably say that they want to live for as long as possible. But when we talk about aging, there are really two different types of aging that tend to come to mind, at least for me anyway. And one of them is chronological age, so how many years we've been on the planet. But the other that springs to mind is this idea of aesthetic aging. Tell me, what are your thoughts on that? What springs to mind for you when we talk about aging?
Aging is a very interesting part of our lives, that we have an inbuilt assumption that it's going to occur and it's going to occur outside of our control, and that it will inevitably lead to us being old and weak, old and sick, old and dependent. So there's this process that we are captured by, that we have a fundamental belief that it's not changeable, not something we can do anything about. But we've discovered that that's not necessarily true, which is very exciting. So it brings to the fore this entire question of what is aging, what are the types of aging, and you've just mentioned a few. You mentioned chronological aging, which is the idea we're getting older each year. There's another concept of that, biological aging, which means, well, how old is our biology as compared to our chronological age? And then you shared a fun concept called aesthetic aging, which I call the aesthetic age the equivalent of biological age, but for your appearance. And the aesthetic age is something that's been being, I would say that's being modified, slowed, or potentially even reversed for quite some time now, because we've got a very, very well invested in industry around us looking younger if we have the monetary means to do so. And that's really, really evident in the people who have the money, particularly movie stars, people who do things based on their appearance, that it is possible to look much younger at a given chronological age than it was before. And that's just one example of how we're interacting with aging in a very powerful way. And of course, I think of aesthetic age as something that's very important. It's something we can invest in because our appearance is an asset. And also, when you're doing so, if you're taking care of your skin by doing that, you're also taking care of your largest organ, which again will have positive impacts on your biological age.
What I find so funny about aesthetic aging is that, I spent many of my years in Bondi, where the fountain of youth runs thick and fast. You live in Byron Bay, which is pretty much the mecca of the fountain of youth at the moment. It's definitely where the beautiful people tend to live. And I would be in the line at the coffee shop in Bondi and see this woman standing in front of me, and she was always wearing the same thing. She was in Lululemon leggings and like a cute kind of puffer jacket and these great sneakers, but with a blowout. So like body says gym, hair says party. And she would turn around and I would think, from looking at her from behind, I would think she was 20, 25, maybe 30. And then she would spin around and I would have this sort of discombobulated experience internally of like, oh, that chronological age clearly doesn't match the aesthetic age, or how old or how young she looks or is clearly trying to look. There's like a dissonance there that would happen in my brain. I'm really interested in that gap.
Well, there's a equally important part of that you haven't mentioned, which is how young does she feel that she is? What age does she feel herself, or more powerfully, believe herself to be? And it doesn't necessarily mean that there is an age in her mind each day. But this example you've used is someone who is trying to stay young in many different ways and likely has some ideas about how she looks younger than she actually is in terms of her chronological age. And that's an aspect of what I call longevity mindset, because in this entire journey with longevity, if we want to have a meaningful discourse about it, if we want to meaningfully apply the things we learn about longevity to our life, that's where we need to start, is with this, what I call a longevity mindset. And here she is exhibiting some characteristics of that. Whether or not she's got the important realizations about longevity that I think are the key fundamental realizations of a longevity mindset, I don't know. But I can certainly tell you that she is adopting more youthful appearance, probably trying to stay young in how she moves throughout her life and thinks about her life. And that in itself is a very powerful example of how we can change possibly even our outward appearance or our behaviors so that we seem to be younger than maybe I used the term, quote, should be. I don't know. It's a very interesting philosophical question at the very center of it.
Yeah, there really is. I'm really interested in this concept of a longevity mindset, because in a lot of the work that I do in communicating health information to the public, part of the challenge is this kind of gap between knowing and doing. And I've spent my career trying to help people close it, because outside of some of the sort of aesthetic aging availabilities to us, e.g. Instagram is constantly serving us up things that with a click of a button we can buy that will make us feel like we are looking younger, feeling younger, investing in our longevity. And that's not just in the aesthetic space, that's obviously in the physical aging space too. There's no shortage of kind of commodification of those products being served up to us all the time. But I find it really interesting to think about a longevity mindset, because it's delayed gratification at its absolute most extreme. Like, we're doing things today that we're hoping will serve us in a really long time. And I know for myself and for many of the people that I speak to, there is this sense of like, head in the sand, I'll deal with aging when it's time to age. But in essence, we've started aging, well, I would think well and truly by the age that I am now, which is 40. When do we start aging? Do we start aging on the day that we're born? Do we start aging at a particular age? Like, when does that really start to happen?
So this is a really important aspect of the discussion around aging and longevity. So you've stated your interest in this concept of a longevity mindset. So let me just first tell you what I think it is. I think it is, to begin, it's having two key realizations, which are related to your question. The first is that disease is not destiny. So we do not have to get old and sick, old and weak, old and frail, old and dependent. We have a lot of control over that process. And it takes a little bit of work to get to that realization. But as soon as you realize how powerful your subconscious and conscious beliefs are around aging and how you've been programmed to think of it versus the reality of what we're learning about the aging process, you can really start to shift yourself into a longevity mindset, which, you're right, is not a goal. It's not something we're trying to achieve in a reasonable period of time. It's a mindset. It's a worldview. And the second part of that mindset, the second key realization, is that the longer you stay alive, the more technology is here to keep you healthy and help you stay alive. And that process is actually accelerating. The rate of technological development is accelerating. So those two key components come together into this bigger picture discussion around aging and help guide us through what we're learning about it. So at the end, you ask the question about aging and when does it start? And so it really takes us to the discussion of what is aging, why does aging happen? And there is a lot of science that's been discovered around this. We have these 13 hallmarks of aging that can tell you what aging is, and we can begin to understand the impacts of that and how to measure it over time. But the question of how or when do you start aging is a biological one. It doesn't have a great, simple answer. Some scientists would say that you really begin to die, you begin to age as soon as you are born. But I like to think of it more through the lens of evolutionary biology, which drives all of life on the planet. And the purpose of life, at its most fundamental essence in all life, is to reproduce. So, as a human being, you begin to become disposable in the evolutionary term, in terms of the laws of evolution, things like adaptation, survival of the fittest, once you have reproduced. So the human body becomes able to reproduce at a relatively young age. We go through puberty and we become capable of reproducing. So in the biological evolutionary biology framework, once we've fulfilled our fundamental role of creating the next generation and passing down our genetics, we become relatively disposable to the evolutionary process. So it seems to be from that framework that we really would begin aging after we've been able to reproduce, which is likely sometime in our teenage to early 20s. And we actually have some evidence in some very interesting studies that many of the primary drivers of aging, such as cardiovascular disease, can begin as early as early 20s. And we've seen some of that data from autopsy data, I believe from the Korean War it was, that we were surprised that people at that young age were already developing these diseases of aging. So it's beginning to happen quite early. But don't let that scare you, because there's a lot we can do about it.
One of the shifts that has been really interesting to watch, particularly in health and in medicine, has been this shift from kind of lifespan, which is the headline that we tend to read in the media as consumers, that we've increased our lifespan to X. But this shift from sort of lifespan to health span, that has been a really interesting shift for me that I'm enjoying seeing kind of trickle down, that it's not just this idea of how long will we live for, but how well will we live? So what are some of those things that we can be thinking about doing now as part of that longevity strategy that will keep us healthier and hopefully happier and more connected for longer?
Yeah, a couple of really important concepts that you just brought up. So you mentioned the concept of a longevity strategy. So at A Longer Life, the project that I run for this exact journey of longevity, step one is getting the right mindset, a longevity mindset. And step two is creating a longevity strategy. And the reason we talk about it that way is because we can use a number of tools to think ahead on the diseases of aging that we are most likely to develop. And then we can take action on those things. So I suggest people first inform that with a family health history, looking at their related aunts and uncles, grandparents, parents, cousins, brothers, sisters, the diseases that they've developed as they've aged, as a starting point for what we are most likely genetically predisposed to developing ourselves. And then we can start to think decades, in many cases, ahead of the development of those diseases and take action. And the action that we know that is so effective is actually the third part of the A Longer Life framework, which is adapting or adopting new, more effective strategies for your lifestyle factors. This is where you start, the answer to your question, doing something about it. And you start by taking the most effective actions that will look at those diseases you're predisposed to and reduce your risk as much as possible. So the lifestyle factors are things like sleep, nutrition, fitness, mental health, and our environment. And there are a few key points you need to take away in each of those that I write about on the website to help guide people through, because in many cases you hear those things, those 5 lifestyle factors, and you think, oh, I need to do all those things better already. I know that. You're not telling me anything new. But what we can do with that new information is we can pick off the things that are most important to start with, given our genetic risks, our family history risk from our longevity strategy. So for example, if you know someone in your family has developed type 2 diabetes, we really need to start with fitness and nutrition because those are going to be really, really important. However, if your risk is for dementia, we really know how important deep restorative sleep is for reducing your risk for neurodegenerative diseases, as well as high levels of physical activity. And these things are ways that we can take that strategy, our known risk profile, and start to take action, oftentimes completely for free, by picking up those lifestyle factors that we know we're supposed to be improving. But what I hope to do is, and what I think I have done, is boil that down to the 3 to 4 things you really need to think about taking action on. And that is how we improve those lifestyle factors. And excitingly, the science is now showing that if we do that, we actually can get 5 to 10 years more of health span, which is the healthy years that we are alive, not just lifespan.
The reason that I find this really exciting is because part of the challenge, I think, for people at the moment is that they're so overwhelmed with the amount of information that is coming at them constantly. You know, we need to move our bodies, but not move them in a way that creates any sort of injury, but not too little that it leaves us open to risk of disease. We need to stop smoking. We need to stop sitting. We need to make sure that we are staying connected, getting rid of old friendships, making sure that we're having sex, looking after our mental health. There's a million things that we could be doing on that front, making sure that we're training our brain. I think for a lot of people, myself included, and I work in this space, that can feel incredibly overwhelming. And so it's rather than that sort of spray and pray approach, it's this, well, let's work out what it is that you need as an individual, because our body holds all of the clues, right? We are all individuals. Yes, there are some key things that all of us need to be doing to live a long, happy, healthy life. But what I need might be different to what you need. And one of the ways in which we do that is by using sort of genetic testing to be able to understand what is in our unique DNA that coupled with that health history, that family history that you talked about, are really kind of the two key pieces of data that inform that. And genetic testing has been around for, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, decades now in the medical space, but now is very available to people for a couple of $100 out there in the market. Can we rely on those sorts of tests to be able to give us the information that we need if we can afford them?
The simple answer is yes, if you choose wisely. And the reason I have to say if you choose wisely goes right back to your point about overwhelm, because this is the journey that anyone will go on when they get excited about longevity or even just health and well-being, is that they will want to take action, but then they will experience conflicting information, perhaps on diet. That's a great example of tribalism and a lot of disagreement. They will perhaps want to engage with what I call longevity technologies, which might be some red light therapy, biological age tests, supplements. But the number of opportunities that they have and the money that they have available to spend are incongruent, and the time and sanity to have to sort through it. Overwhelm is exactly where people land. And this is precisely why I've created a longer life. And that 4-part framework is to guide you through without the overwhelm taking over. So we simplify things a lot when we do that family health history, but we can actually complement that directly with a high quality genetic test, because then we can actually look at our individual genome, our actual DNA, and effectively fill in the gaps. The family health history is absolutely still going to be relevant because that's telling us genetic information. But if we take a high quality test that specifically looks at disease risk for the major diseases of aging, for example, cardiovascular disease, neurodegenerative disease, metabolic disease, which includes diabetes, if we are able to look at those things in the genetic space as well as the family health history, we can get a very clear picture, an even clearer picture about where we should start taking action. So I always like to share the example that I have some retinal health, eye health issues in my family history, and my genetic testing, which I share on the website, tells me that I have increased risk for age-related macular degeneration. So that simplifies a lot of things for me in terms of my supplement stack, the appointments that I want to be making. I want to be checking on my eye health regularly. I want to be taking supplements that can support my retinal health and my eye health over time. We know things that can reduce the risk of age-related macular degeneration, and I can take those steps starting now in my 30s that will have meaningful impact in the future. So it is really crystallizing that strategy that allows us to step out of overwhelm and know how to take effective action.
So let's say that somebody's listening to this and they don't have access to their family history and they aren't at this point able to afford to invest in some genetic testing. What data would you recommend people know about their health? Perhaps just working with their regular GP. Let's say that they live in the country and they have a GP that they don't see very frequently, that for whatever reason they don't have access to their family history and they aren't able to access genetic testing at the moment. What would your baseline health dashboard look like, whether that's working through with a GP or maybe leveraging some kind of wearable or health tech to be across those baseline kind of drivers of a picture of what our health looks like in any given moment?
Yeah, that's a really interesting and fun thought experiment. And I'll put it in there with the caveat that I think most people can gather some level of useful information for our family health history. But provided that they couldn't in this thought experiment and they're not going to purchase a genetic test, but they do have some budget or are already using some things at home like a wearable, there's actually a lot we can do. And we would look to the lifestyle factors to start. We would look at our sleep and we could track a few simple things. How many hours a night am I sleeping? How well rested do I feel after I get that sleep? And what time am I going to sleep and waking up? Those are the three key things for sleep. You can do all those without a wearable. You can do those with a sleep journal and just writing down what I just pointed out. And the reason those things are so important is that you need to know how much sleep do you need? Is the sleep that you're getting quality sleep or not? And those two things together, you'll know from how well rested you're feeling and your likelihood to need a nap or possibly doze off during the day. That can really signal that there's some issues if you're feeling that. And your sleep schedule, you want to be going to sleep around the same time every night and waking up around the same time every morning, because that is how your circadian rhythm works. And your sleep is a hormone cycle that doesn't want to have its bedtime pushed back by 2 hours one or two nights a week because you want to go out on Friday night. So the sleep piece is one great example of how we could put together a bit of a dashboard without any additional information at all. If you did have a wearable, you might be able to get some idea of how quietly you're sleeping, meaning are you snoring? You can also look at things like how often you're moving and get some approximations for your total amount of sleep. Wearables do try to approximate stages of sleep. Honestly, they're not measuring it directly, they're guessing it, and all of them tend to disagree. So I don't know how much use we get out of that. But we can walk through each of the lifestyle factors and do that type of analysis. So just to continue the example through one more factor, I'll pick up fitness. So with fitness, we want to be getting a certain level of physical activity. That's absolutely known. Everyone can benefit in general from moving more unless they have some very limiting, damaging injury or health issue that their doctor tells them not to. Most everyone can move more and get stronger. So we want to increase our level of physical activity really as much as we can to be getting at least an hour of it a day. And then we also want to make sure that we're getting our heart pumping at an elevated rate, a bit beyond a slow walk to maybe a quick walk uphill, for example, a few times a week as well. We need to be doing some strength training to keep our muscles strong, particularly our legs. And we want to make sure we train our balance, because balance is often one of the first things to go. And when we're much, much older, balance issues and leg strength issues are ultimately why we end up falling and losing our ability to be independent. So we know that those things are really important. So I would put some things like the ability to balance on one foot on that dashboard. Can you do that for 30 seconds? Can you only do it for 10? How many squats could you do? How many walking lunges could you do, provided that you can do those without joint pain? If you can't, modify those to be easier on you. And you could track that and want to build up your strength over time.
It's so interesting that you mentioned sleep. I spoke to my mum this morning, and I also spoke to her yesterday. I'm very lucky. Mum and I are quite close. I speak to her most days. When I spoke to her yesterday, I was miserable. because I was absolutely exhausted. I've got a 6-year-old who doesn't love sleep but does quite like waking me up to talk about the fact that she doesn't love sleep, and the sort of chronic cumulative sleep deprivation that we've experienced in this household over months and months, if not really years, since like basically when you're heavily pregnant, you stop sleeping, and then the sleep game for many of us is really challenged for many parents for a long period of time, a lot longer than I thought it was going to be at this point. And I spoke to Mum yesterday, and the words that kept coming to me yesterday as to how I was feeling were lost, miserable, and exhausted. Lost, miserable, exhausted. Those 3 words kept coming up for me again and again and again yesterday. I had a decent night's sleep last night, and today I feel like an entirely new person. And so I was reflecting this morning on I'm still not very good at being able to sort of sit in a non-judgmental, self-compassionate place when I'm not in a good mindset or a good headspace. I'm pretty tough on myself. So the questions that come up for me are, why do I feel like this? Am I depressed? What's going on? Why am I so ungrateful? Like beating down on the person who is already beat down on. And really interesting that you mentioned journaling, because I think journaling is this wonderful way of being able to not just track, but reflect on what have I taken? What have I done? How has that made me feel? Because I think that often we can be quite disconnected from that. We can engage in these kind of healthy and unhealthy behaviors. And I don't know for anybody else who's listening, but certainly for me, not necessarily draw a parallel between something that you may have done or might not have done and that you're feeling in a certain way. It's like there's this lag between the things that we do and how we feel. And so I think journaling is a really wonderful way to be able to kind of take some ownership of that. I'm interested in your experience of that. And as somebody who is a biohacker, and I'd love for you to explain for people listening what that is, that kind of sense of capture and reflection must form quite a big part of your journey. I'd love to know whether or not that rings true for you. And if so, what are some of the things that you have done in your pursuit of exploring longevity that you have found have had a big impact, and things that have surprisingly to you not had as big an impact as you thought they would?
It's a great lead in, because you've highlighted one of the things that I think has the most important impact. You have been able to, in your own example, pull out those 3 things that you felt that were present for you. You were also able to then notice and observe your inner critic. These are different parts of the psyche that we have a lot of awareness of. There's many frameworks for looking at them. And of course, being able to observe ourselves objectively, see how our thoughts are coming and going and passing through us, and realize we don't have to identify with them. And then also digging into the patterns that we have within that are established most often from a very young age, including that inner critic that you described. These components of diving into our mental health and observing them and learning how our mind works are absolutely pivotal for our health. And in fact, are one of the most essential things we can do. And journaling is a really powerful way to engage with that. I've been journaling for years. I've been doing meditation for years. This allows me to observe my thoughts, to identify limiting beliefs, to see when I'm in a pattern because I feel unsafe. And then that's going to lead to certain behaviors. And that ultimately throws your nervous system out of whack, and it impacts your physical health. And we know over the long term that people who have more purpose, better social cohesion, that enjoy their life and are curious about it, live longer. And that's because ultimately the mind is the most powerful piece of this entire puzzle. And so when it comes down to biohacking, which I'm happy to define, that is really a biohacking framework that you've described, because we're observing something, we're writing it down, we're making an observation. We're then seeing how we feel differently throughout the day, maybe even just having made that observation. Maybe we try some things to help regulate our nervous system or to get back into a more grateful, positive framework. And then we can see how we felt afterwards. That in itself is an experiment. That's what I call a self-experiment. In its essence, it has all the right things. Measure, try something with your body, with your biology, your mind, measure again. How did it change? Analyze and learn from that. That is biohacking. That's what biohacking is. Biohacking has gotten itself into a very niche place when people think it's only trying crazy supplements and injecting yourself with interesting compounds and implanting devices in your body and all the rest of those really maybe cool and interesting things that are out there, but ultimately aren't relevant, I should say, to the everyday person. Whereas what I just described is. And so I'm always doing that. Then I'm encouraging my readership to learn how to do that and giving them examples of doing that. So we started at the beginning talking about aesthetic age. I've now run a couple experiments where I've scanned my face with a high resolution imager before, tried a new, very interesting and longevity focused skincare item, and then tested afterwards and seen very positive results and therefore continued to use it. So if I did not see positive results, I would not continue to use it because there's no data to suggest that I should. We can do that same thing with supplements, with dietary changes. And I've done that with both of them and measured my biological age before and after and been able to see, oh, if I take this supplement, it improves my biological age by 3 years. That's a pretty good indication that it's doing some great things for me. If I change my diet in this given way, it will take my inflammatory age in my body down by 6 years. Seems like something I should keep doing.
Hey team, Casey here. I just want to jump in and just clarify something. So he's talking about inflammatory age and biological age. Now, there are companies that you can work with to test those things. I don't think you need to. I think the kicker here is, do you feel different? Do you feel better? And the only way that you're going to know that is to kind of tune into yourself, maybe journal a little bit, take down some notes, try and keep a little bit of a track as to whether or not after you've started taking the thing or doing the thing, is it delivering the result that you want? Only you are going to know the answer to that, and you don't need to invest in fancy technologies in order to be able to find out the answer to that. Okay, back to the chat.
This is how we figure out for each of us individually what works for us by being a biohacker, by running self-experiments. And along the way, you'll find things that don't work. I've had, the more I do this, the more I get sent and offered free products and supplements and all the rest, and I'll take a look at them. And more often than not, I say no thanks before I've even tried it. Sometimes I take it on board and give it a try and realize I don't think it will add value for people. So I'm not going to recommend they spend their money on it. But sometimes it makes it through all the process and the company actually does share the same values as I do and wants to help people with their longevity and health. And we find something that really seems to work. And then we might even share it with our community to try it and see if it works for them. And then it does. And we know, wow, this is a great technology. This is the fourth part of the framework on a longer life. It's exploring longevity technologies and learning what works for us and how we can figure out if it works for us.
Give me an example of something that you've said yes to recently and something that you've said no to recently, because my suspicion is that there are a lot of the same things that are going to be being served up to people to purchase on social media platforms for their own health and well-being. Can you give us an example of something that you have gone through the process of and been pleasantly surprised about? Not saying that you are directly suggesting that people run out and get it, but something that you were surprised by that you actually think could have some value or some benefit, and something that you were sent recently that you were like flat out no, or perhaps it's something that you know that people are seeing out there in the market that you would recommend that they not waste their time, their money and their energy on.
Yeah, I really, really care about that last question. It's ultimately one of the things I'm trying to do here for people is give them things that can work and show them how to try and see if they'll work for them. So an example of something that I recently tried that I was very, very surprised by was supplementing with a compound called alpha-ketoglutarate, specifically calcium alpha-ketoglutarate. So without going too deep into the science, it is a longevity, quote unquote, supplement that's had positive impacts in worms, then in mice, and then initially in humans. And I tried this on myself, testing my biological age and my blood work before and after taking it for an entire year. And that was the only thing that I changed. I didn't add any other supplements. And I was very surprised because I tested my biological age 3 different ways before and after. And across all of them, I saw improvement. And I saw a mean or average improvement of 3 years in my biological age from adding in that supplement, alpha-ketoglutarate. So that is a very successful and interesting self-experiment, because now I know it's worth my money to continue investing in that supplement. Whereas if I had not done that, I could be spending $1,000+ a year and not be getting any of the benefits that it's purported to give me. So that is one really good example of something that surprised me, because I did not honestly expect that would occur. An example of something that I don't think is worth people's money is these, I won't name the brand, but there's a brand out there that's made some very significant waves over the last 2 years, where it says it will analyze your metabolism by blowing into it. So effectively, you blow into this device and it will tell you whether or not you are burning fat or you're burning carbohydrates. And then this is supposedly going to guide you on your dietary choices moving ahead. And the reason I didn't like this device was that it was hard to use. It was a bit annoying to use. It gave me confusing results when I know my body very well. I could tell you if I'm in fat burning mode or carb burning mode just by how I feel in my body and knowledge about my diet. And it was very inconsistent in the results that it gave me. And then third, in terms of what becomes actionable out of that, there's not really much you gain from that. People who are burning carbohydrates all the time already needed to make the same choice that we knew they needed to make before they spent $250 on this device. They need to eat less carbohydrates. And you could have done that by just tracking your calories on a free macro tracking app that you can download any one of several dozen options for on the App Store and get to the same answer.
I'm glad that you've said that, because there's so many of those things. Putting myself in the position of the consumer, of which I am, I wonder whether there are a couple of questions that people watching an ad being served to them can ask. And for me, those questions would be, who is selling this to me? Are they credible? Is it a credible source? If it's an influencer, are they getting a kickback? And we know that's pretty transparent now, that they have to tell their audience that they are getting a kickback. That said, I have seen some influencers sharing in what seems to be a very authentic way that it is something like you, that they have been sent, they have tried, and that they have genuinely enjoyed, so that therefore they thought that they would share that with their audience. But I think for me, those questions would be, who is serving this ad up to me? Do they have any credibility in this space? And is there any evidence to support it? That said, those companies are getting quite savvy now at the way that they communicate. They know that they can kind of get around certain safeguards in terms of being able to kind of communicate to us as consumers. For example, there's a menopause supplement that is everywhere at the moment. I'm being served it every single day. A menopause supplement for women that talks about balancing out your hormones. What is the question from your perspective that people should ask themselves before they hit add to cart?
I love this question. It's so great. And it's actually, I can share insights from the process that we go through, because we're looking to expand our partnership network all the time and to enter in relationships like you just described, where we share information with our audience about this product. And if people purchase it, we get a commission on that. That's how part of the business model works. And so we have a great deal of responsibility in executing on that, because we do not want to recommend any products that don't work or come from teams that don't share our values. And so that's where I would tell people to start. If you see a product, it's advertised on to you, let's say on Instagram, as you've described. Let's go to the profile for that product. Let's click on their website and let's first go look at their team. Can you even see their team? Who founded the company? Who owns the company? If you can't see that, don't buy it. First up, because there's nobody putting their name on the line saying, this is my reputation and I believe in what I'm doing. We want to look at who's doing it, and we can do a little bit of homework on those people. Have they had reputable businesses before? Do they have a good reputation, a good history, or do they have none, or perhaps a conflicted history? It really, the people running the business are who are going to set the tone for the entire set of values and the mission for that company. So you really got to be comfortable with that straight up. The next thing that I would ask is that people look and see, do they have some science on their page? And it's great if they have some science. You might not be somebody who can dive into that science. That's part of the role I like to play. It's one of the reasons why I think I can add value, because I'm a scientist and I can read those papers and I can tell if they're credible or not. And ideally, they would have somebody in their team or a partnership with some research organization that maybe developed the original technology, and there's some good data that they can point to and some science that came from that relationship. That would be the most ideal case. If those two things are true, then we would like to know that other people have had a positive experience. Checking real reviews, comments on Instagram are often a great source of unfiltered information about people's opinion about products. Do a little bit of digging there. And if you want to add to cart and try, remember that you are ultimately conducting your own self-experiment. So figure out a way to measure before and after, even if that's as simple as recording things for free in a journal about how you feel and taking that supplement and then stopping it and seeing how you feel after you stop, and try to treat yourself like you're a biohacker. Because if you do that, you are. And then you can know if that was actually helping you. Because if a product is really going to help you regulate your hormones as somebody who's in perimenopause or menopause, you're going to feel very different when you take that product. That will be noticeable for you. I actually work in the menopause space and really aware of all the products that are showing up in that arena, and you're right to be careful. But ultimately, you're the only one who can know if it will work for you. So the responsibility does fall on your shoulders. And that's why we show some examples on alongerlife.com of how to run self-experiments, because you can learn to do this too and have fun while you're doing it.
I love that. Let's play a game. I want to throw some ideas at you, and I want you to just give me a short answer, like we're on Jeopardy, as to what, like, is it a yay or a nay from a longevity perspective? And I appreciate that many of them will require a much larger response, but just from your perspective, like yes or no and why. You ready?
I'll do it. Yep.
Okay. Sugar.
Don't eat too much of it. Generally okay. Sometimes not good for your gut. You'll know.
Coffee.
I love coffee.
Me too.
1 to 2 cups a day is probably safe.
1 or 2?
1 or 2 is actually probably good for you, as long as you're not drinking it too late in the day. Remember, your sleep's important.
Red wine.
I don't personally drink wine, but I think enjoying some red wine from time to time is a safe bet. Some would say that it's good for your longevity. I think it's inconclusive.
Binge watching Netflix.
I binge watch Netflix sometimes. So yeah, just don't do it every day, and make sure you get your exercise and you eat well and you're not eating bad foods while you're able to zone out.
Red light therapy.
Oh, very, very valuable, assuming that the red lights are actually good quality ones.
How do we know?
Exactly. Look for the team. Look for the same thing I walked you through. Look for the team. Look for the values. Look for the science. Look for the way people are responding to it. We've got a great example of doing that on alongerlife.com with a wearable red light device.
Botox.
I would say that it is useful. Use as little as possible. Start as late as possible. And remember that once you start, you can't really stop.
Got it. Retinol.
There's better options for your skin now. And I think that unless you have some acne issues that's specifically helping, by telling your skin to peel off, which is what retinol does, you're actually telling your face to age faster at a biological level.
Oh, I just leaned in. I can't tell you how much money I have spent, how much money people are spending on essentially it's vitamin A, right? A variation of it. What would you replace that with?
Well, I would replace that with skincare products that are working for your skin. So you have to do your own self-experiment. Mm-hmm. I have a really great example on my website. I won't name products here with you, but of doing this with a product that I think is far superior to retinol. It has a unique peptide in it that turns on your skin's repair mechanisms, and that's a far more effective solution than retinol.
Okay. Ozempic or semaglutide products. What's your thoughts on that? Because we know that belly fat, so visceral fat around our organs, is a real danger as we get older, and overweight and obesity is a risk factor for so many of both our biggest killers and the things that make us not age well in terms of morbidity and disease. What are your thoughts on those types of weight loss products that we're seeing everywhere at the moment?
I'll put an asterisk on this one because they're all pretty new. So we don't know what we'll know in 20 years, but they've made it through the very tough regulatory approvals that are required. And you make a really good point, because if we are overweight, if we are obese, if we have high amounts of visceral fat, we are increasing our risk factor for all of the diseases of aging at the same time. And it can be very hard to get out of that rut. And your metabolism kind of gets stuck in this insulin resistant mode. I think these drugs are going to help a lot of people, and I think it will improve their longevity.
Okay, that makes me happy. I'm scared. I'm scared about us not having a solution, and I'm scared about the solution. Because typically when we solve one issue, others tend to crop up. And from my very shallow and limited understanding of people who have taken those drugs, and also who have had things like bariatric surgery. So they're not simple fixes, but it's a relatively quick fix, right? You fix the issue of your, for example, your capacity to be able to eat as much. But often what isn't fixed is the mindset and the emotional connection to what got them there in the first place. And I hope that we know enough about those factors that is being factored in to people taking those drugs moving forward. Can I ask you this? What mistakes do you see people make in the longevity space? Is it overtraining? Is it downing some particular supplement? Like there are a lot of people who play in this space. And from my understanding of you is that you're a very evidence-based thinker, and you seem to be really cautious about what you share and how you share it, which I really appreciate, because there's so many cowboys in health and well-being. What mistakes do you see people make out there that worry you for people for the future?
Most people jump right to the end. Oh, I'm going to try this supplement. Oh, I'm going to buy this red light device. Oh, I'm going to pick up product A or B. Most people go straight to spending money to make changes. And it really needs to go all the way back to the beginning, to mindset. That's where this starts. And then getting to a strategy and knowing how you should take effective action, because you're just kind of trying things without any real framework when you just jump into buying stuff because you want to do something. You've got the right motivation inside of you. You want to be healthier. You want to live longer. You want to make a change. Great. You can do that. But that change is not made by purchasing something. That's the biggest mistake people make. That change is made by getting the right mindset and then knowing what you should be thinking about and changing the lifestyle factors first as best you're able before you go spending your money.
I love that. And I also love just asking ourselves the simple question of, what do I want my later years to look like? Where do I see myself living? Will I be living in an aged care facility? Will I be living with my family? Will I be able to lift my grandchildren? Will I be traveling with my partner, who is also hopefully around with me for a really long time? I think that there's a really powerful question in the simplicity of that, right? To even inform the mindset piece. Can you take it that one step back? What does that look like for you?
This is so fantastic you brought this up, because in the longevity mindset course that I'm going to be releasing pretty soon, which will be free, we will look at those two key realizations I mentioned, that disease is not destiny, and that the longer we stick around, the more technology is here to keep us healthy. In that first realization, one of the things we will be doing is looking at the innumerable examples of people who are defying the stereotypes of aging, that are surfing in their 80s, powerlifting in their 80s, sprinting in their 90s, traveling the world and lifting weights with their partner in their 70s. These examples, particularly through the power of social media, are more prevalent than ever. And it really highlights that this is your choice, that the lifestyle choices you make will set you up to be a person who remains independent, strong, vigorous, curious, purpose-driven late into life. And most likely, if you are able to do that with your partner, you both can take up a longevity mindset and do that together. And that's exactly the way that I look at my life. And ever since I developed the framework for this course, I've been doing what I'm going to assign people homework to do, which is to find someone in their community who's defying the stereotypes of aging and ask them some questions about what gets them up each day. Why are you still surfing? Why are you still teaching dance classes? Why are you here at this conference teaching everybody how to walk correctly? What gets you going every day? And it'll come down to purpose, curiosity, and those fundamental realizations of a longevity mindset.
I love that. I had lunch at my grandparents' house yesterday. They're both 90. My grandfather still plays golf twice a week. He needs a cart now. He can't make it around the 9 holes walking with his gear, but he has a little cart that he drives around in, but he's still out there. You know, my nan's still going to Keep Fit class every Tuesday and Mahjong every Wednesday and staying connected and doing their things, and they still live independently. And that's what I see as a beautiful kind of end to my life. I hope that is how things look for me. I want to end by taking us back to the beginning for you and understand how you got into the longevity space in the first place, because you had, a couple of experiences in, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think your late 20s that really kind of opened your mind to the fact that a long, happy, healthy life is not just a given.
Yes. So I had a very close encounter with cancer in my late 20s. When my son was born, we had to have a cesarean section, and we knew that there was a growth on my wife's right ovary, and it turned out to be cancer. And then that took me down a couple-year journey of supporting her through some really big surgeries, chemotherapy, and really coming very close to the edge in terms of the curtain of our mortality, jump into the other side. And at that same time, within just a few months of that initial diagnosis, I had 2 of my closest friends also be diagnosed with cancer in their late 20s. One with testicular cancer that spread to his brain, another with colon cancer that had spread locally. And by the power of modern medical technology, all 3 of them are still with us today, which is a powerful reflection on what technology can do for us. But ultimately, once I got through that journey, I looked at this entire area of healthcare and asked the question, why are we still experiencing these late-stage disease diagnoses, given all the technological development we've had? And I started by doing a deep dive on preventative health screening. And what I found surprised me, because what I realized was that we have all of the technology required to detect disease at a very early and treatable stage. However, we're simply not using it at scale. It's taking a long time for it to become available to the everyday person. And part of my mission now is to spread information about preventative healthcare. And it also becomes ultimately a discussion around why we get this risk for cancer increasing as we get older, or any of the other major age-related diseases. It's because aging itself is what puts us at risk. And as you begin to dive into that, you begin to understand that we are very rapidly understanding what aging is, how to slow it down, possibly how to halt it. And in the future, we will be able to reverse aspects of aging, I'm very confident as well. So it's a very exciting time that initially I entered because of a very challenging life experience, but now has turned into a personal mission to help people get ahead of disease, to think ahead of disease, and to learn how they can do things like preventative screening. And just to make one final point on that, Australia actually has 3 nationwide cancer screening programs. Colon cancer, where everyone gets mailed a test kit after they're 50. Another one is breast cancer, and the other one is cervical cancer. And just as an example, just to really put a feather in the cap on this one, only 45% of adults who get a colon cancer screening test send it back.
It's mind-boggling, isn't it? I love everything you just raised. And apologies for, you can probably hear my my miniature dash hound in the background. He obviously feels very passionate about preventative healthcare too. But you raised such a good point. And just a couple of other things on those screening programs too is that the bowel cancer screening age, you are actively invited from 50, but you can actually get your hands on a kit for free from 45 now. Breast screening also is actively invited from the age of 50, but you can get a free mammogram from the age of 40. And mammograms aren't necessarily the best test for everybody. So if you've got dense breasts like I do, then you may need some further investigations and best speak to your GP about that. But I just think that the work that you're doing is such a vital part of a preventative approach, because we know that we spend a very small proportion of our healthcare budget on prevention activity, which is such a shame because it's much easier and much cheaper to solve the issue long before they become an issue or in the early stages of disease rather than at the other end, putting the ambulance at the cliff, so to speak. But the most important part, I think, of all of that is you, the listener, me, you, Nick, becoming the biggest advocate for our own healthcare, making sure that we know what is available to us, maybe making sure, as you say, that we know what our risk is, and then we can be the biggest catalyst in that prevention journey. I think that's so powerful, and I love the work that you do. Thank you for chatting to me today. It's been a real delight.
My pleasure, Casey. I really love where you ended on that, because that's exactly the type of future that I envision. By spreading awareness, by spreading this message, there will be enough of us to evoke the change where ultimately we significantly reduce the amount of human suffering in this world because we are detecting disease early when technology can do something about it. So thanks for helping to hold that vision alive.
My pleasure. Say hi to all the beautiful people for me, especially the Hemsworths, if you see them.
Gotta have to interview that Chris guy someday. He's into longevity, you know.
I know. Can you ask him for me?
Sure.
Thank you so much for joining me for that episode of Next of Kin. I love chatting to Nick. Health and wellbeing is one of those spaces in which there are so many cowboys, and finding people who are deeply committed to the science and you feel like you can trust, I think is really important. Over at alongerlife.com, Nick's website, he takes you through some of the experiments that he's done so that you can make your own informed decisions about the things that you do. And I was kind of surprised at how low-key his routine is. I asked him offline and said, tell me, I'm sure that you must drink Peruvian organic mountain goat milk for breakfast. And he was like, no, I'm careful about what I eat. I move my body lots and I enjoy testing out whether or not I can get a few more years in good health on this planet. So I think it's a worthwhile thought process to put yourself through as to what you want the end of your life to look like. Share something that you learned today with someone that you love. That's what Next of Kin is all about. My name is Casey Barros. I may or may not live to 105, but regardless, I will see you on the next episode of Next of Kin. This podcast is presented solely for educational and entertainment purposes. It is not intended as a substitute for the advice of a medical or qualified professional.